Hello again, everybody. This is Steve coming to you with another writing video. This one, I don't know if I should call this one a writing intro. This one actually starts getting into the meat and potatoes of your actual writing, starting with short stories. Short stories are a good way to get your feet wet when it comes to story writing. And just to show you, this is says it'll go. Come on, you. Does not like me. There it goes, finally. Okay, it's being a jerk. Anyways, this right here is I would say a reasonable guide. I think it gets a little more granular than I prefer, and I agree with parts of this, and other parts I don't. But if you want to, you can use this as a chart and a guide to go by when writing fiction. Microfiction is not something I write. Microfiction is essentially tweet sized, or what tweets used to be, which was I think like 140 characters. So up to 100 characters, or well, 100 words. It's actually be a little bit larger than a tweet, but maybe like a modern tweet, because now you get like 500 to 1,000 characters that you can use. But yeah, it's up to 100 words. It's basically kind of like a meme or a tiny little vignette or something like that. Again, not something I write. Those microfiction would be something that would be very specialized and somebody who enjoys writing those little word memes, if you will. Really, if you're going to start with anything, start with not even flash fiction. Microfiction, flash fiction, don't even worry about those. Like I say, those are kind of special case situations. I would say run with the short story range of 1,000 to 7,500 words, which is what we're going to cover today. From there they have novelette and novella. Personally, I put both of those together, and I run short stories from 1,000 to about 10,000 words, or even 20,000 words. I've done short stories for 20,000 words before. I still classify them as a short story, but again, that's my opinion. Up to 20,000 words. 7,500 was typically my average, so on the top end of what they would consider a short story here. Like I say, this list is a bit more granular than what I typically run, and not everybody's going to agree on the breakout of this. I agree with parts of it. I disagree with other parts of it, but that's just kind of how I was taught, what my experience was, how I saw the novels and stuff. So this is more a guide rather than hard and fast rules. But like in this case, they say epic starts at 110,000 words. I disagree. 150,000 would start into epic territory. So, and most of my novels range anywhere from 70,000 words up to, I think the largest I've ever done was 150,000. But then that didn't survive to the final draft. It ended up being like 110,000 words because I trimmed 40,000 out that I realized was just filler. It was just fluff. It didn't have any real value to the story. But I wrote out the entire idea first, and then went in and started trimming out parts that were not valuable to the story. So, but that's part of the writing process. And this is more finished words than it is total words, because your rough draft isn't necessarily going to be the same length as your final draft. It might be smaller, it might be larger. Mine originally had a tendency to go big and then get trimmed down. Now it's a case of it starts on the smaller end of things, the smaller side of things, and then as the editing goes along, I realize, I take out the fluff, but there's less fluff than there used to be, a lot less fluff. And there's more like, I didn't cover this detail, I didn't cover that fact, I've got to flesh this out more. So the story grows a bit in size. It might only grow 10,000 words, but it will grow a bit from what the original rough draft was. Because rough draft, like I say, when you're writing the initial story, don't worry about it being perfect, don't worry about it being pretty. Get the idea down. You can clean it up later. And believe me, you're going to be doing a lot of cleanup when you're first starting out. As you get further along and more mature in your writing, you will have kind of muscle memory where you will be able to pick this stuff apart a lot easier as you go along. And when you're running the rough draft, you're automatically running those things that you've learned through your mind, and you're catching the problems in the rough draft before you start getting into major editing. And when you get into major editing, there's less you have to do. But again, that comes from experience, and experience comes from writing, and writing a lot. Every day if you can get away with it, at least an hour. But anyways, let's go back to the other one. Yeah, anyways, with short stories, like I say, they're small. You do not have a lot of words to work with, up to about 7,500 to 10,000. Which, if you look at a short story, there is not a lot of room for world building, character building, things like that. It's going to be primarily the core story. And the reason I recommend going with short stories as an initial learning tool is because you learn to get things done and make things happen and do it as quickly as possible. And that might sound a little counterproductive, but when you start getting into building your worlds and building the backgrounds and building all this other stuff, you can easily follow Tolkien's thing. Well, now, he wasn't like wandering and rambling and stuff. He went too far on the description side. The rest of his story was great. If you took out the excessive descriptions, his stories would have been even better. So, he went into too much detail. With short stories, you learn to get in, get done, get out. So there's that, and you learn to tell a story and get as much information to the reader as possible in the smallest amount of space. If you read any one of my short story anthologies, like if you had your chance to read Dreamland Articles 1 and 2, and then you had a chance to read the new one, which is out, the Storyland Chronicles, you'll see that there's stories in there where I do give background. There's certain things you have to give the reader history on and background so that they understand what's happening, why it's happening, why the characters the way they are and stuff. But what you're doing essentially is you're not writing the whole epic and the whole story and all that. You're writing what amounts to essentially be one chapter. So, and usually with those is you want to open the scene, describe your scene, describe your characters, and set the reader up for what's about to happen. One of my fun ones is Ferret's Folly, because basically the story opens and it's on a beach. And you see these two little ferrets come up, and you're like, "Oh, it's a story about ferrets." Until the ferrets shapeshift into a couple of kids, and you're like, "What the heck?" And then you realize, "Oh, these kids have magical shapeshifting abilities." So right there, just in with that action, you've told the reader some back history on these two kids. And then I go into a little bit of narration of, okay, they're a prince and princess. They feel stuffed up and caged in by being in the castle, so they have escaped and gone to the beach. So you've given a little of history about them, what they're thinking, why they're there, the fact that they broke the rules to get there, and some other things like this. And you get to go through and describe how I go through and describe how they spend their time at the beach, and they take a nap, and they do all this other stuff. And then I bring in the villain of the story. And you very quickly realize in that story that this villain wants to destroy them because he's jealous of them, he's jealous of the king, he hates them, he wants to overthrow them. And, of course, they're running away, and they're using their magic and their shape-shifting ability. And if I remember correctly, they have 3 different forms that each of them can shape-shift into. And same thing with the guys that are chasing them. So you start to figure out, oh, in this kingdom, this is a more common magic than just like nobility or just these 2 kids. This is something that a lot of people have. So again, you're telling a large amount of information in a very small block of text, and you're doing story building, you're doing world building, but you're doing it on a micro scale, because you're not spending like half a chapter explaining something or building the back history or something. The history is being built as the story goes, and it's being built through observation. Because I can't sit there and give you the whole history of the kingdom and why, and the bad guy and why he's got a beef with him. All you need to know is he has a beef with the king, and he wants to kill the prince and princess to to kind of spite the king and put in motion his efforts to overthrow the kingdom and other things like that. I'm not going to tell you the whole story, but you kind of get the idea. There's a point in there where it looks hopeless, and then the King's Guard shows up. King's Guard has been out looking for them, and they figure out where they are due to the circumstances and everything that's going on. And it's kind of ends as a happily ever after. And like I say, that you also, like I say, you find out that, because you got the King's Guard and they've got shape-shifting abilities, so it's kind of like, oh, okay. So you start to learn that this is a very common magic in this kingdom. It's not just nobility. You've got commoners, because among the King's Guard, you're not going to typically have nobility except as officers or leaders, and the regular grunts are all going to be peasantry, the citizenry, whatever like that. So you got commoners and nobles that both have this special magic ability. And like I say, you've got up to 7,500, maybe 10,000 words to tell all of that stuff. So it's kind of like speed dating, but it's world building instead. And you're doing very rapid world building. And you're only building the relevant parts, because since you're only dealing with this one narrow chapter worth of events, you don't need the broader story of the kingdom and the magic system and all of this. You're just focusing on what's happening in that particular chapter worth of story. And you've got to hook the reader, and you got to keep them hooked, keep them on the edge of their seat, and do it with a very, very short word count. And that is not easy. I mean, it might sound easy, and I'm describing it as easy, but it's really not. But at the same time, don't be scared by that. This is how you learn. You go in, you try this out, you make mistakes, and you come away learning how to fix the problems. Because if you can get good, effective, solid short stories and do it, and short stories are good because you don't have the commitment that you have with a novel. You don't have all of the big background story building all of the different threads, all the different interrelations and stuff like that. You're dealing with just basically one large scene, and you get that nailed down. And you do it again, and you do it again, and you do it again. And as you get better at it, you start putting together the things for building a novelette, and then eventually a novel, and maybe an epic if you get good enough and you're adventurous enough. And each one that you go larger with, there's more you have to build into the story. You start actually having to do background and bigger world building, not just situational or world building for that one scene. You're having to build it for the larger story. Who's the villain? Who's the hero? What is the crisis? What is the overarching theme? Things like that. And like I say, when you're writing short stories, you learn to build those in micro scale or in small scale. And then those skills that you build there translate into larger and larger books, because then when you start writing the bigger book, you start looking at it not as just one standalone story or one standalone scene. You're now viewing the whole story as, okay, this one starts things out and starts telling the story. This one introduces this group of characters and their story. This group introduces another, this scene introduces another group of characters and their story. Now, then the next block starts tying those first three together. Or maybe you have, like I've had as many as 8 or 9 different storylines going at the same time in a novel. And if you can figure, you learn how to handle those by writing short stories. Because, like if you write a short story, but then you write like the sequel to it is another short story, and a sequel to it is another short story, you start learning how to put together larger books. Here's a good example is Gone with the Wind. Would you believe that that was not originally written as a novel? That was originally an anthology of short stories. The thing is, those stories go together in a series, and they build a larger story. So, essentially that's all a novel is it's a group of different short stories that come together as a larger story. It's just that there's more foundation and infrastructure and framework and everything else that goes into the larger book. And eventually you'll be able to get in and start handling stories like if you read Weaver's Forge. With Weaver's Forge, I had throughout the entire story at least 3 storylines going at any one time, and they're all separate here and there. They might temporarily cross in small amounts here and there. Like one of them would have been, I think, Shanomar would have jumped across at least two of the storylines. But with me, it's essentially 3 separate stories, all about the same basic, event, or the same basic events and the world and the story and everything that they're all about the same thing. They're just from different parts of the galaxy. You're seeing the details about the story. I'm not going to spoil it for you, but you should go read it. But basically, there's 3 different stories, 3 different groups, all kind of following the same story, but from their part of the galaxy, their unique part of the galaxy. And in the end, I eventually bring them all together into the final battle. And you start, and effectively taking those 3 separate storylines, keeping them straight, and keeping them on the right track to where they will all come together smoothly at the end. There's no like really clunky having to, write them together, and this is why they're here, and it's some really dumb reason or something like that, or some really lame cliche method or something. That's one that you can do for something like that. I should say that's what I did basically was, get in there and you created those 3 stories and then merged them together at the end for the final battle and the finale and everything else. And it's a fun read if you get a chance to read it. It was a challenge for me. I enjoyed it. There was a lot of things in motion in that book at the same time. So, and it wasn't in a way that would confuse the reader, but it was still a challenge for me to keep everything straight because of how much was in motion in that book. So, and it had a large character set too, because you had Mike and his crew and everybody associated with him. You had Hector and Drod and everything associated with that. And you also had Jalyn and Flake and everything associated with that, including Shanomar and the Noetians and the Red Paladins and all kinds of fun stuff. So, what else can I say? One way you can try learning short stories, if you can't picture the story initially, write an outline. Start your story as an outline. How would you describe this story if you were telling it to a friend? And you're going to write it as a summary, as like the Cliff Notes version, the something that you would put in a notebook that's maybe 300-400 words long that explains your story. Write that down. Write it down like you're going to tell it to somebody. If you have to, tell it to that person and then write notes as you're doing it. Maybe take a family member, explain the story, and they'll ask you questions, which is good. Because if you don't state something clearly, they'll ask you, well, what about this? What about that? Well, okay, they asked that question, so let me go ahead and write that out as a note that I need to explain this in the story. prototype the outline of the story with them. Just like I say, like you're talking to somebody over coffee and you're explaining the story. Take note of their expressions. Take note of what you're saying, how excited you are, how bored you are, how you see the characters. And also, while you're doing that, let the story tell itself. Like I said, you write your notes, you write your outlines. Once you get that outline, you get it the way you think is right, flesh it out. Now you start going in and writing your story from those notes. And don't be dogmatic about those notes, because like the old saying goes, no story outline ever survives the rough draft. Believe me, you'll write it out, it'll look great in your head, and then once it starts getting down on paper, you're going to go, whoop, that isn't a good idea, that's not going to work, or that's going to take the character in a direction I don't want him to go, or it's going to take the story down this route I don't want it to go, etc., etc. And here's the thing, if you get a story that sucks, if you get one that's boring, if you get one that's frustrating, you have trouble with it, go back, look at it, figure out why. Is it the story is, you're trying to push the story in a direction the story doesn't want to go? Are you being pedantic about something? Are you trying to beat a dead horse? When I say beat a dead horse, that's something I have a problem with, where I'll try to express an idea, but I don't exactly know how to express it, so I'll repeat it over and over and over and over again. When I'm doing the rough draft, I'll take two paragraphs to say something that I can probably do in a third of a paragraph. And I've done that before, where I've taken half, 3/4 of a page just to try to explain something, and then I realize I kind of over-explained it, and I was repeating myself a lot, which, I'm sure if you've listened to my videos, I even repeat myself in the videos, because I'm over here trying to phrase my thought, and I'm struggling to phrase it correctly. And eventually, you come in there and you look at it and you pick it apart and you go, okay, I repeated this and this, so let's try to summarize this a little bit better, because the original sentences evidently didn't do the job, so let's rethink it and rephrase it and trim it down. Maybe use your original 2 paragraphs of explanation as a outline or guideline for summarizing it, and then you summarize it down to, or summarize it or distill it down to the key points. Like I've said before, don't be afraid to fail. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. If your first one, if you write a story and you think it's great, and everybody who test reads it for you thinks it absolutely sucks, don't get upset. Okay, you didn't, you made something that you thought was good, but they didn't like. Go in and find out why. Now, some people are going to be like, well, I just didn't like it, and basically they're just jealous of what you wrote. I've had it before where your story's horrible because it doesn't match up to so-and-so. That's fine. You're not so-and-so. You're your own style. If they don't like you because you're not like their favorite author, fine. Go find somebody else who will critique it for you. But ask them what they didn't like about it, why they didn't like it. Was it something that made them feel uncomfortable? Did they think the character was too shallow, too selfish, too pedantic, whatever it might be? Ask them, find out why, what they liked about it, what they didn't like about it, why they liked it, why they didn't like it, etc. like that. Take that, put that feather in your writing cap, learn from it, grow, and keep going. It's like Land of the Lions, Lion in the Wind. When I first wrote it, it was all story, no background. Good story, but there was no world building, there was no background, there was no character building. It was just so-and-so came in and did ABC. Okay, so who's so-and-so? Why'd they do this? Where are they from? Etc. like that. And I didn't explain any of that. As I learned and as I got feedback, I realized where I was going wrong. My dad suggested, instead of diving right into the main character, why don't you tell where he came from, which ended up with 6 chapters that introduced Burgon, the creator of the lions, because he's mentioned in the original story, but he isn't. He has no character building. So, I then went back and spent 6 chapters essentially doing a prequel to the main character, where he came from, how he became what he was, who funded it, who made it possible, etc., etc. So, and that's part of the learning process. Like I say, I started out doing short stories, and then I went to novelettes, and then eventually went to novels. My early novels were 60 to 70,000 words long. Novels now are 110, 120,000 words. So, and it depends. Like I said, and it's not every novel's that way, because like my Earthfleet books tend to be in the 70 to 85,000 range. Just because that's the type of story it is, that's the universe. If you should, with that book series, anytime you write a book, or at least for me, every time I write a book, I should be wrapping things up around 70 to 85,000 words. Not necessarily, I'm not setting that word limit for myself. What I'm doing is, the story itself, the way it's told, is finished after that time for that many words usually, because I've done everything I came in to do. I've wrapped it up, and it comes out to just about that number. And I'm not aiming for that number. That's just how they end up coming out. And don't set yourself word counts. Now, if you have a problem with getting enough content, set yourself word counts. And don't set hard limits. Set yourself with a word goal. Like, okay, if I'm writing a book or a novel and I'm only getting 50,000 words, why am I only getting 50,000 words? Was there not enough story? Was I not telling enough about what was going on? Did I not give them enough back history, etc., etc., etc.? So, it pushes you to expand yourself and expand the story by adding a word count if things end up getting up too short. Of course, if you're overly voluminous like Tolkien, you might have to set yourself a cap so that you keep your descriptions short and sweet and to the point, and you're not adding fluff to your story. But, to each person's different. Anyways, like I say, with a short story, this is a good way to get your foot in the door and start learning. It's a great place to make mistakes. And not have a mistake that's so costly you've got to go and rewrite a novel. Gold Rush from Offworld Chronicles. It took me 3 tries of completely rewriting that novel before I finally got it right. So, and that will happen. Don't be afraid if it happens, because if it fails the first 2 times, it's clunky, it's pedantic, it's lame, for lack of a better word. Figure out why. Figure out what you did wrong and fix it. And, and learn from it. Because, once I figured out what I was doing wrong with Gold Rush, book 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 flowed out of me so well. And I was like, there was no rewriting. It was one shot. I got it right the first time. Everything worked out. But I had to go through 3 complete rewrites of book 3 to get that figured out. Once I sorted that out, the rest of it, I really grew. I really stretched myself. I really improved a lot from there. And if you read the books, you can see the improvement, and you can see, places where I struggled, but then I figured it out and got it better. And further down the way, I was looking for these problems that was being caused by the way I was doing certain things. And I was able to head those off early and deal with them and figure out plots and what was I trying to achieve, how do I achieve this, what's the back history, etc. like that. So anyways, I'm at almost 29 minutes, so I will stop here. If you guys want to, one of the things I'm thinking about now that I've done kind of all my tutorial stuff, is to maybe, we could sit down and do some practicals. I'm not thinking like YouTube streaming, because I can't do streaming. That's long story behind that. I can't do streaming. But what we could do is, if you wanted to form a group of writers on like Discord or something else like that, we could get together, form a writing group, and start doing some practicals. Get some people, some of you who are more experienced writers in there to help out those who are just starting out. And help, like the guys who are more experienced, help out the guys who are less experienced, and help them out with the different genres. Like my primary is sci-fi. I do some survival fiction. I do a little bit of fantasy, so I'm not going to be a real good expert in fantasy. But, maybe some of you are good in fantasy. Some of you are good in romance. Me, I would just, I can do romance in a story, but not as that genre. I can't write just that genre. I can put a romance story or sub story within a main novel, but I couldn't do it just on its own. But there's people out there that can write romance all day long and make it really, really good and enjoyable. So, something to think about. If you guys want to work up something like that, let me know, and I'll be happy to work with you and see what we can come up with. And like I said, we can sit there and do some practicals, some workshops, some things like that. Just find an afternoon when everybody's free and go at it. So, anyways, thank you guys for listening, and I will catch you next time.